Okay, so there's some things that I think are very important when it comes to preparing for an interview. First of all, it's important that when you apply for a position, no matter whether you believe you're going to get the job or not, at the point to which you apply for the position, you need to print the position description. On some websites, the position description is no longer available after the position closes or is no longer available on the website. So you need to make sure that when you apply for the position, you print the position and you file it away in a file that you might have. It's very important because you might need to review it later. You're definitely going to need to review it before the interview. There are some employers who send you the position description prior to your interview, but you might not have that employer that chooses to do that. So print the position description as soon as you apply for the job. I would take some notes on the position description saying, apply for the job on this date, and then any additional information that you might hear. That way you keep all that information because you might need to rely on that information at a later time. It is very, very important that you print the position description. Second, now that you printed the position description, they've called you and offered you the opportunity to come in for an interview. You need to study the language in that position description because that language is what they're going to be looking for. The ability to implement that language and to use that language in your language when you're in that interview is going to be very important because they're looking for keywords. It is going to be what sets you apart from other candidates who've applied for that job. Being able to say that you have what's that word? Oh my gosh, relative experience in this position, and you know the language that governs that particular job. It's very important. Also, number 3, I think it's important that when you're preparing for an interview, practice with a friend. Think about questions that always come up in an interview. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us an example when, which I'll get to in a second. There's some things that always come up in an interview, and I think if you have a good friend, just have them ask you a few questions. Go to the website, type in behavioral questions or type in common interview questions, and then get a friend and say, hey, read these to me and give me some feedback about how you think I answered them. You also want to look at your posture because answering the questions is important, but if your posture is not confident, then what you're saying to the employer is like, I might not have a backbone in this position, especially if you're looking for, somebody's calling me, especially if you're looking for a management position or something like that. You need to present yourself as a total package in an interview. So, again, print the PD, study the key language in the PD, and always practice with a friend and get that feedback. Number 4, lock down examples of professional experiences that you've had because you will have behavioral questions come up in the interview if you're interviewing with a good company. They're going to ask you to name a time when you had to give a coworker some difficult feedback. Give us an example of a time when you had to blank, 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 blank. You ought to have some examples in your head when you had to deal with a difficult coworker, when you had to give a manager some feedback, when you had to deal with a difficult customer. All those types of things are always going to come up in an interview. You need to be able to also, this whole thing about give us 5 of your weaknesses. That might come up, but I think more importantly, somebody's going to want to know, give us an example when you made a mistake, when it was your fault, you made a mistake, how did you fix that mistake? That's a good question that you need to be thinking of, and you need to have examples in your head so you don't freeze. Because if I ask you, give me a time when you made a mistake, and you're like, I can't think of anything. What you're saying to me is that, you don't make any mistakes, and it's okay to make a mistake. Now, you want to make sure that if they ask you a question about a time when you made a mistake or you messed something up, that you don't say something stupid one time, I sent out a memo to the company president and 5,000 employees, and I misspelled, the president's name. If you did that, you might want to leave that out. I don't know. But think of relevant experiences, especially associated with the job, because you've reviewed the position description that you might think to be valuable in an interview. Okay, finally, Dress wisely. It's important to dress wisely. I have a couple of things that I do when I'm getting ready to have an interview. First of all, if your interview is on Monday, the Monday before that, you ought to know what you're wearing. You ought to be able to envision that. By that Wednesday, if you need to get something dry clean, all that ought to be set up, because the last thing that you need to be worrying about when you have an interview is what you're wearing, where everything is. Get all that established. Where is it at? What needs to be clean? What do I need to pick up? Have a ritual associated with interviewing, especially if you're doing a lot of interviews. You ought to know what it is that you're going to wear in advance so that when it's time to go, you have all that set up. Secondly, you need to know what the weather is, where to park. Sometimes what I like to do, if I know what the interview is instead, I like to just drive to the location, see what parking is like around the venue. Because if you get in a situation where, you got on a black suit and a white shirt and you're just in hot weather and it's 90 degrees and then you don't have a parking space, you're going to be like running from 3 blocks in a black suit in 90 degrees and you're going to be all sweaty. So you need to prepare for the interview. You know your body better than anybody else. You know what you have to wear. You have to be strategic and you have to think wisely and you have to think in advance so that on game day, it's not like you have to pull all these things together. Everything is already going to be on point when you have your interview. So those are just some tips that I have for making sure that you're ready for the interview. There are lots of different tips that you can check out. You can get more advice about your resume and pursuing jobs. All on my website. It's iamdamo.com. It's not like a HR-esque website, but I do have a series of videos and things that I think would be of value to you. So thank you for checking me out. Again, that's iamdamo.com. Have a good life.